today we're going to be talking about three different sections as we go through our presentation. We'll be talking about the words that you use, the stories that you tell, and then finally we're going to bring it all together into a pitch at the end. So there's a whole lot that we're going to be getting into here, and starting with your words. So who is it that we are actually talking to after we graduate? Who are all the different people that we're going to come across in the job search? Feel free to unmute and just shout out all the people you expect to encounter in your search.
Recruiters.
Recruiters.
And hiring manager.
Hiring managers.
Equity and inclusion leaders.
Equity and inclusion leaders. Sweet. Who else? You're all hitting the nail on the head. Yeah, recruiters, hiring managers, they want to hear from you. But there's a big difference in how we talk to them. So often when we go out into the job search, we speak a lot from our own perspective. And this is one of the trouble areas of the job search, is that everything you look at online says focus on yourself, advocate for yourself, build your personal brand, talk about the culture you want to be a part of. And it's all you, right? It's like you to the point where you're like, can people please stop shining a spotlight on me, please? Like, I just want a job. I just want to do good work, right? And the interesting thing, once we actually go out into the job market, is that everyone is speaking from that me first perspective. But when we're talking to recruiters, when we're talking to hiring managers, when we're talking to employees or CEOs or diversity teams, each of them has a different thing that they care about. And we have to speak to them, to their wants and needs, to their perspectives. And that is going to make us stand out much stronger in the job search when we go out and do it. So how do we speak to these folks? All right. This is that me first versus them first perspective. So you are here to solve their problems, the company's problems, not the other way around. And I think you could probably see this most clearly when you look at someone's cover letter. Has anyone, read a cover letter recently or written a cover letter recently? Yeah, if you go back and you take a look at that, I almost guarantee that every paragraph starts with I or me or my or and I actually went through, I got one from someone once. Every single sentence in the entire thing started with I. I was quite blown away. And so these are the things where we start to go, oh my goodness, wait a second. Everything I'm saying is about what I'm going to get, right? What mentorship can I get? What is the culture like? And does it fit my needs? And all these different things. And at the end of the day, all of that matters, but it matters much more during the negotiation stage than it does in maybe the first round interview or something like that. Or maybe it's more appropriate while networking, but not so appropriate on that screener interview or something like that. And I'll get a little bit more into what that means. So as we go out into the job search, what we want to do is take a step back and say, who am I talking to? What is it that they need? And then how do I tie what I want in with what they want so that it's a win-win? And if you think about it, so often someone will go to a company or try to network. Here's a good example. They'll try to network and they'll say, hi, my name is Martin. I really like your company. Are there any jobs available? And what is everyone going to respond to that? How are they going to respond? Has anyone sent that email?
I was approached like that, and I want to know, who are you and what can you do for me?
Exactly. Who are you and what can you do for me? And most of the time, the response you'll get is either nothing or go check out the job board because I don't know who you are and I'm not going to spend the time. So already we're seeing it play out when we're on the other side of the coin, right? So what are we currently saying? Does anyone have examples of messages that they've sent or things that are top of your mind of things that you've said while chatting with people about jobs? Or that you've heard other people say?
I sent something and I said, can we connect so that I can show you how I can be an asset to your company and bring out the best in your company, or that I could fulfill a need that you don't have, can't currently fulfill at this point. I always try to phrase it so that I'm filling a need that they have.
Absolutely. I love that approach. Any other examples of things that you've said? When you're asked the question, tell me about yourself, what do you typically say in response?
For me,
Just anyone who wants to chime in.
I usually start off with, just background information of where I'm from or where I went to school or what relates to this job that I'm
Absolutely.
applying for.
I think that's standard, right? A little bit of background, history of where I'm from and all that stuff, right? So if I were answering the question that way, I'd say, hi, my name is Martin McGovern. I grew up in Arlington Heights, Illinois. I went to school at St. Viator, and already you're all falling asleep and none of you really care, right? And if I started that way, it's really hard to maintain that attention and maintain that engagement. And if you think back to when I introduced myself, what I started with was a little bit about my background, but why it's relevant today, right? So I start with what I'm doing now, then I go backwards of how I got here, and then I reiterate why it's important to you. And that's something that we'll work on. Now, it makes perfect sense when we say, tell me about yourself, that we tell them about ourselves, right? But every question that we're asked in the job search has a subconscious question that comes along with it. And that's the question that we want to answer as well. And so here's what I typically hear from folks when they graduate a boot camp and I say, tell me about yourself. Hi, I recently graduated and I'm excited for an opportunity to learn in this role. So when you think about this, what does this say to the company? What do they hear? Remember, there is the literal question and the literal answer, and then the figurative question or the subconscious question and subconscious answer. So if you were the hiring manager and you heard someone say this, what are you actually hearing from them? What are you hearing them say?
no experience. You recently graduated.
Recently graduated, no experience. Anything else?
I hear about the excitement for learning.
Excitement for
It's,
learning.
yeah.
Nice. And what does excitement for learning sound like to an employer, someone who's paying you a salary?
That you're teachable and that you're gonna work.
Very optimistic. I love it. I love it. But here's what they're actually hearing. Hi, I'm inexperienced, unemployed, and need you to teach me. And the key thing here is I'm excited to learn in this role. That's why it comes off that way, right? So each individual word that we use matters because it signals different things in their mind as to what it is that we care about, what our values are, and so on and so forth, right? So if you're in your screener interview and the question that you ask is, what is the vacation time in this job, right? It's way too early for that question. And it's signaling that your value is getting time off over other things like performance or skill set or industry or whatever. And so I tend to encourage people to ask questions about performance over questions about value exchange. Value exchange can wait till negotiations. And the same thing in these kinds of questions, right? Instead of saying I recently graduated and focusing on that, we want to focus on the more positive things, on the things that we bring value to, right? Being a recent graduate is great for you to know, and it's great for you to be secure in your own story and yourself, but they only need to hear what's relevant to them. And that's what we want to get across in our pitch.
So, Martin, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So I understand that it asking for like paid time off in the interview process can be like a little off-putting to the employer. But like as an employee that that is kind of a concern to
Mhm.
see like what they're. So would you like maybe recommend asking like what is your work-life balance, like to kind of mask the benefit
I
question?
like where your head's going. I like the fact that you're trying to find ways to ask the thing in different ways of saying it. It's more about timing in that case, right? You will find out what the vacation days are once you get the offer. And if they don't give you the vacation days in the offer, which sometimes happens, then in your email back or in your negotiation conversation, you can say, what are the typical vacation days? You know, a lot of times people are nervous to negotiate. So one of the tricks that we use is to send an email with negotiation questions. So what are the typical vacation days? Are you willing to go up to this number for the salary? Um, is there a 401k match? You kind of sandwich in the things that you're nervous to talk about in with other things in order to be able to have a more well-rounded conversation and not get so hyper focused on the number, on the salary and things like that, because people can get very nervous about that toward the end. But there is so much that we can do in how we ask things and when we ask things. So what I'll
Yeah.
typically like to do is I'll wait for the vacation stuff, because that's honestly the last thing I care about when it comes to the job that I'm applying for. The thing I care about most is, do I click with this person? Is it the skill set that I have? You know, there's about 50 other things that are more important than vacation days at the end of the day. And then, you know, I of course want to nail down how many days off I'm going to have, and are they going to let me go on the vacation I've already scheduled, or whatever the thing might be, you know?
Yeah.
So 100%, it's just more about timing um, and phrasing when we get to those things. So I appreciate you asking that. Any other questions around that?
I was just gonna say something to that too, because I'm glad that you asked that question. But I was gonna even say, like, coming from experience, 'cause I used to work for like a pharma company, pharmaceutical consultings, and I ran all the selection centers to like interview all these reps. And even like in a job like that, where like that's a sales job and like a lot of it is focused around like money and commission and stuff. I will say like another like part of it, and just being transparent, it, like Martin's right, and like it is very important with the timing. And like I like, if they don't bring it up like after everything, after the offer, that's fine, but like it is really off-putting to an interviewer if you initially bring that up. Um Even if like, because you got to think about it as like, these are like, they're just taking what they know, they don't know you, so like for them it comes across like you don't actually care about the company. And like, I know it sounds dramatic, but it often comes across like kind of negative. So just to kind of harp on that, it's very, but like if you haven't like done like interviews, you wouldn't know that, because even I made that mistake when I first started interviewing. But then when you're the one who's kind of in the other seat, you like it, there's just something that just comes across that way, like if you don't time it the right way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've got to realize that, you know, when you're going into an interview, they've already talked to a handful of people. And, you know, the number one thing I hear when I say, why do you want this job? So I'll sit down with folks and I'll say, hey, what industry do you want to work in? Any industry. Okay. What job title do you want to have? Any of these like 50 job titles. Okay. What city would you want to live in? Any city that'll take me. Okay. Why do you want this job? Because it has a salary. Okay. So we're in this mode where I just want a paycheck, right? And it's interesting when you get into the job search how we think authenticity is hyper focusing on the thing that's most pressing to us, when authenticity is really understanding the full picture. And so a lot of times people are like, well, I need a paycheck. Well, clearly, if we don't have a job right now, a paycheck is our biggest stressor. So they're asking, why do you want to work here? Not what is your biggest stressor. And they're two different questions. And this is, again, why it's so important to like hear the subconscious questions that people are asking, not the conscious questions that people are asking. So if I were to say, why do you want to work at, Google? Most people are like, well, because it's Google. And I'm like, Right, but who would ever not say that, right? It's like, who would ever say, I don't want the paycheck? Or who would ever say, I don't want the brand name? Or who would ever say, I don't want X, Y, or Z? And the same thing for networking. A lot of times we think it's inauthentic if we don't tell them immediately in the first message that we want a job. But if you're networking in a professional sense, it's kind of expected that you want a job at some point, right? Even if you already have a job and you're networking, it's like, well, you know, I might be open to a better job, right? There's always this like seed of, yeah, we might be able to collaborate on something together, right? And so if you think about dating, right, you wouldn't go to the first date. Yeah, you wouldn't go to the first date and sit down and say, hi, my name's Martin. I want to get married.
Oh my God, I just texted that in the group chat.
Right? If you did that, they'd be like, you haven't even asked my name yet. Right? Like, we want to build trust and rapport first. We want to build relationships. So interviews, informational interviews, networking, personal branding, it's all about building relationships at sometimes interpersonally, sometimes at scale. And the goal here is to set up many opportunities for jobs, not just get the one. And so, you know, I was helping a group with their personal brand today, and they started getting messages from recruiters for senior roles. And they're like, these aren't the right roles. And I'm like, yeah, but they will be. And already you're getting that outreach, right? So if you're starting from people are coming to me with too high of expectations, imagine where you'll be in 4 years. And so these are the kinds of things that we can start setting up, the kind of bowling pins that we can start setting up to knock down later. And if we don't get into the habit of kind of understanding the subtext, we'll sort of over explain our way out of an opportunity. And so the subtext when you're interviewing is that you want a paycheck. Every single person in the interview wants a paycheck. The subtext when you're networking is you want a job, right? And so it doesn't even need to be said, because every time you're interviewing, every time you're talking to someone, the subtext is always there. And then what we can go to the next level up, right? We can talk about what they really want to hear. And I think the best way for me to maybe illustrate this is Nike doesn't say, hey, buy our shoes because our stockholders want a good return this year. I've never seen that Nike ad, right? But what they do say is, hey, do you struggle, you know, with your knees hurting when you run? Oh yeah, sometimes. All right, what kind of running do you like to do? You know, trail running and maybe some street running. Oh, well, we have a great pair of shoes that helps decrease the impact on your knees while you're running on streets and trails. Would you like that shoe? And we're like, dang it, they got me. You know, like they've already set up that relationship. They're already talking to us. They hit us with the message in so many different ways that the right one gets to us. Or if you think about Supreme, Supreme doesn't say, buy our big red logo, you know, jacket or whatever it might be, because we think that it's important to spend a lot of money on a name brand. No, they say this will increase your status with your friends on Instagram. So people go, yeah, sure. Okay, I want higher status on Instagram. And they buy Supreme, right? So we always want to be looking at the wants and needs. And again, this is what companies do to get us to spend those big bucks on Christmas or on the holidays or whatever it might be for you. Birthdays coming up. So we just want to reverse engineer it and use it right back on them. If they're going to be using these tactics on us, we should use these tactics on them. And that's with them. This is an old marketing term. What's in it for me? We know what's in it for us when we get the job. A salary, hopefully some security. We'll get some benefits, hopefully, you know, all these great things. But what are they getting? They need to have a higher ROI than what they give us in salary and pay. And we need to know what that ROI is in order to get through imposter syndrome and realize that the value we bring to the company is going to be higher than what they pay us. So is anyone struggling with imposter syndrome right now? All right, I'm seeing one hand.
No way.
None at all. None at all. Tell me what it feels like on your end. What's going through your head?
As far as imposter syndrome, feeling it.
Yeah.
I would say just getting, when I think about if I was to get the job, just trying to get acclimated to that environment. I'm used to, from my background, I'm used to laboratories in academia, or I'm used to like just revitalization groups that have more of a lackadaisical, well, not lackadaisical, but more so a comforting and more nurturing environment.
Sure.
But when I think of tech, I think of unfortunately sterile and very modern and very like I don't know, pompous. So it's like I don't know how well I would fit in. So it kind of makes me not want to go just delve into a job, like a full-time job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a solid way, a very common sort of transitional insecurity. And I think one of the things that helps with that is to get out and actually talk to people who work in the field, right? Because tech is broad. Tech is actually almost encompassing everything now. So I would assume a company like BetterHelp, that is all about mental health and self-improvement and stuff like that, would have a little bit more of a laid back environment or a healthy environment that maybe like Twitter or something like that, right? And so maybe it's a little bit more about identifying the places or the industries within tech that you'd want to go after, in order to find that same kind of vibe, if that's what you're looking for, unless you're like really trying to change vibes totally or something like that. But I definitely see where you're coming from. What other sorts of imposter syndrome are folks feeling?
Yeah, other candidates and people in the field having more experience, knowing more technologies and more projects than us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big one. Or getting on a team and everyone being like so far ahead of you. One of the fun things that I hear all the time from people is once they actually get out there and start networking or start a new job or whatever the thing might be, they tend to report back that, oh my gosh, the fears in my head were so much bigger than the reality, right? And it's almost that Jaws effect, right? As soon as you see the Jaws shark, you're like, wait, that's just a big animatronic thing with plastic teeth. But when they're just going dun dun dun, that's when it's most scary, right? When it's hidden under the water and we can't really see it. And so one of the funniest things that happened recently, I had a guy who was trying to break into cybersecurity, and he was really worried about this SOC analyst role. He thought it was just this really intense thing that he would never get his head around. And he went and talked to an actual SOC analyst, and he comes back and he's like, yeah, I talked to that guy. And 10 minutes later, he goes, oh no, it's really routine, super boring. You'd definitely be able to do it. And yeah, don't worry about it. Actually, probably look for other roles. Like he comes back, he's like, now I went from being scared of being a SOC analyst to wanting more than what that role offers, because apparently it's a lot more boring than I expected it to be. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is so fun to encounter once we're out there. And so much of it is about getting out of our own way and out of our own head and talking to real people. So a big thing that we want to do as we're talking to folks is try and discover what it is that is the reality behind, the fiction. The job listing, that's fiction, right? What they have in that job listing is not real. That is their wish list. What they say on their website is hyperbolic. It's marketing, right? So we can sort of start to see through this mirage and see the reality of it is every company is just a bunch of people like us trying to make things work on a daily basis. And as soon as you get far enough in the job search and you start seeing people can't respond to emails on time, set deadlines that they can't keep, how many times are people going to say, oh, we'll definitely get back to you by Friday, and then they don't get back to you for like 3 weeks and you're going nuts behind the scenes, right? Well, it's because they don't have their act together, right? All these companies are just people. It's just a bunch of people trying to make things work and failing every day. So it's okay that we're failing too, or that we don't have everything together, or that things are imperfect. We can work towards that same kind of I like to think of it more of as a practice than a race to the finish line. If we can get really good at these skills, sales skills, marketing skills, communication skills, if we can get really good at these skills, or not even really good, if we can just get decent enough to get out of our own way, we can have a much better career because we'll be better every time we get into the job search. And I used to have an incredibly bad, well, I still have a bad anxiety disorder. And one of the things, like, I would go on informational interviews, have full on panic attacks, and like literally choke on a frog like halfway through. My absolute worst informational interview, I tried to he said, "Tell me about yourself." And I tried to answer it 3 different times and couldn't get the words out. That's how scared I got. And to be in college again. But I was so nervous talking to this guy. I couldn't even, I was like, "My name's Martin and I go to DePaul," and I like could not finish a sentence. And eventually he's like, "Well, I got work to do. So thanks for coming in." And I'm like standing in the cold in Chicago, just like, what truck just hit me? And what's funny is that 6 years later, I reached out to him via email and was like, "Thank you for the learning experience. You probably don't remember me, but I had my absolute worst informational interview with you of my life. And I just wanted to thank you for that learning opportunity." And he goes, "You're right. I have no idea who you are. I don't remember that at all, but let's get coffee." And we ended up having a great conversation for like 3.5 hours. So like, we can learn through these things. We can try stuff. We can test things. People won't remember who you are. It's okay if you just kind of fumble your way through for a bit until you get the right words. And so we'll practice some of the words today, but we have plenty of opportunity to test and iterate. Any questions on what we've gone through so far? Okay, I'll keep going. So what should we say instead? Any ideas? What sort of things should you say when people say, "Tell me about yourself"?
I'm the person you're looking for.
In what way?
Stop your search.
Now you got to follow it up. Now you got to follow it up. This is all transferable to my dating life. Thanks for that comment. I just saw it. It's hilarious. It actually is. My little brother, one of these points that I make all the time is about building on a conversation and building rapport. And it comes, the most obvious example comes from my little brother's dating life, when he was like, "How come I can't ever get dates set up with these ladies?" And I go, "Let me see your messages." And it's like, "What's your favorite food?" "Pizza." "What's your favorite color?" "Blue." "What's your favorite?" It's just like, I'm like, dude, build on the conversation. Come on. These are going nowhere. And like, ask a follow-up. And so much of this is about like setting up the next part of the conversation as well. And I think a lot of times we close conversations. Like if someone says, "Tell me about yourself." "I grew up here. I went to school here. I do this." Silence. Okay, next question. Like that silence in the interview, that's the killer part, right? So what we want to do is be able to build rapport. So here's what I do. Here's why I do it. Here's how it helps you. And I'm excited to hear more about your business and see how I might be able to bring value. What sort of things are you looking to hire for in this role? Now we have a conversation going, right? And so what do we say instead? "Hi, I heard you have big goals for your business. Here's how I can help you solve your problems and grow." Granted, everything in here is templatized and very overly written, but as you're going out there and practicing this stuff, it'll become more conversational and it'll become more fluid as you go. So here's a few questions you can ask yourself. What problems do they have? What skills do I have? So let's take a moment here. When you're thinking about the companies you want to work for, what problems do they have as a company? What are the most common business problems from a tech perspective?
Growing their business.
Growing their business. What is the biggest problem that they have growing their business?
Trying to attract customers.
Attracting
or
customers
clientele.
and clientele. Attract and retain customers and clients. Keep going. Someone else is going to say
Yes.
something.
I also have like a story as an example, just because
Yeah,
I ended up
please
talking
do.
to someone. So I don't know if you all know Toast, the company that runs the software for a lot of restaurants. So
Yeah.
so when well, I spoke with them and did an informational interview, and they were saying that they fired a lot of people because of the pandemic, and they let
Yeah.
like half of their staff go, and then their business shot up because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And because everyone's using their software. And so now they have to build out new products that work with restaurants during this specific time. And so now they're hiring like more people than they ever were.
Yep.
So it's like, so that like in particular, like specifically to build out something that, to build out new tools was like one of their issues.
So creating new tools to keep up with changing times. That's why companies need developers. What are some other reasons that companies need developers?
They have antiquated legacy systems. They need to bring it into this century.
There you go. They look like they're from the 90s. Okay. What other things?
I guess they would need, this is Josh, I guess they would need some form of security against like their assets.
Security, huge, huge. All of these are great conversation starters for networking, for interviews. You know, when you're sitting there, you can say, you know, what sort of security concerns are you keeping in mind as we head into a much more digital age for businesses, as people start working remotely, as all these different things start to change, right? Now we're asking intelligent questions about the industry, about the business, rather than saying, well, how much vacation am I going to get when I'm in this job? Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference between what sort of security solutions are you considering to keep up with remote work during this changing pandemic versus how many days am I going to get off around Christmas? Who's going to be the candidate that they want to bring on? It's going to be the one that thinks about the business, right? And then how do your skills solve those problems? Well, I've done testing so I can debug your website, or I've done X, Y, and Z so I can reduce the number of clicks on your website to increase purchases, or I can build better emails for you that will increase conversions, or I can do, you know, all these different things that are utilizing that business sense in addition to the skill that you've just spent all this time developing, right? Any questions or thoughts on that? All right, and this is where we get into our stories. So how do we actually tell them what we do? I'd love to just put this question to everyone. Go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So one of the things actually that I'm kind of curious about, to piggyback off of what Angelica also mentioned, was, you want to know what the culture there. And I'm really interested in, because, especially in interviews, I feel like it's important. This is your time to find out if you're, not to waste their time, but not to waste your time either. And so, yeah, I agree. Like asking about vacation and money at the beginning is not the right thing, but asking about culture as far as their values and what is it that they really stand for and things like that, to try to get an answer. Do you feel that's also appropriate at that point, or is it still keep it more? I know ultimately you want trying to get the job. If you're trying to get the job, you're trying to answer what they want, So, but how do you, I guess, manage that? I guess you do kind of, this is kind of a dance where
It's,
you kind
yeah,
of
for sure, for sure. I obviously there are culture questions that can be asked and should be asked. Again, I think it's timing and approach. And so I typically like to ask culture questions while networking, or I try to assess their culture based on the conversations. So I'm sort of a firm believer that what people say is very often not in alignment with what's real. And so whenever I ask a company, what's your culture like? I'm only going to get good responses because the people work there and this is an interview, right? No one in an interview is going to be like, actually, I kind of hate our culture. No one's ever going to say that in an interview. They're going to say it's great. We have awesome people. We go on happy hours. It's wonderful. I mean, I can think back to some jobs that I had where, people would cry at happy hour every day. And like that would never came up in the culture conversations, right? And so these are some funny things where I'm like, someone will be in an interview. I think in an informational interview saying, hi, how do you like your job? What gets you excited about your work? What are you struggling with? What are the difficult parts of your job? Like in informational interviews, I think that that's great to ask. But in a real interview, asking, how do you like your job? Everyone's going to go, it's great. Even though they probably got like pulled in last minute to this interview and they have no idea what they're doing and they've not been trained on how to interview. They're all stressed out right now. And like, in my mind, I tend to think I want to get honest answers more than I want to get the right answers. And I want to have a good connection with this person more than I want, platitudes. And so if I'm talking to someone and they're kind of like, if I have 2 or 3 interviews, because every company is going to put you through 5 to 7 rounds of interviews nowadays, I feel like in those 6 rounds of interviews, I'll get a decent sense of whether or not people like working here just from the vibe. So I tend to assess the vibe of people in order to get an understanding of the culture. And the way I look at it is, did I click with these people or did I not click with these people? If I click, it's probably a good culture fit. If I didn't click, there's really no amount of words they can say to me. I mean, back in the day, they could have convinced me. But nowadays, there's really no amount of words that you can say to convince me that it's right. And I might be going a little extreme on this one for you. But obviously, there's if you care about diversity and inclusion and they don't have a program, that's a question you should ask, right? Or if you care about certain aspects of like how they run the business, I think that's all fair. But there's a great meme that's going around online. It's like, in your interview, ask them how they handled the pandemic. And I'm like, really? You want to get confrontational in your interview? Well, just be sure you're not getting called back, but okay, go for it. And like, these are the things where I sometimes like, I agree with the ethos, but I don't agree with the execution, right? If you're on a, let's use the dating analogy. If you're on a date and you're like, so tell me about yourself. Are you a nice person? Everyone's a nice person, right? Everyone's going to say they're a nice person. But then, what you really want to listen to is, how do they talk about their ex? How do they talk about like their parents? Like, how do they talk about like, you want to infer this person's personality rather than listen to what they say. And this plays into how you talk about yourself as well, right? If I got on here and I was like, hey, everyone, I'm like the nicest person, you're going to go, this guy's already a D-bag. Like, I don't want to talk to him. Like, if I'm like, I'm so empathetic and I wish people were as empathetic as me, you're like, who's this jerk? Like, get this person off the screen, right? But if I tell you a story about a time that I helped someone with their job search as they were going through a divorce, that'll showcase empathy without me having to say it. So if you look at people's pitches, everyone's like, I'm a hard worker. Tell me a story about the hard work that you've done. Or I'm a team player. Everyone who says they're a team player tends to be the person on the team that doesn't do anything. Like, these are the things that we have to start realizing, that the words we're saying, we think we're being clear, but we're actually muddling the message, right? And so, Carlos, I think that was you asked that question, right? Yeah, to that point, I think that there's a time and a place, and I think informational interviews is the best place to find out about culture. Go try and meet people who work at the company who aren't interviewing you for the job. And if you can, low key, find someone who quit or got fired, because they will tell you everything. I had coffee with someone who had recently gotten fired from a job. Actually, I had an interview for that job, met her at an event and said, "Hey, I'm interviewing for a coaching role and we might work together someday." And she went, "What?" And I went, "What?" And they hadn't told her yet, but she was getting laid off and I was interviewing for her role. And she and I ended up getting coffee, and she just told me everything. And she's like, "If you get this role, here's what you need to know." And I was like, "Thank you very much. That was very helpful." And so we're really good friends today. She's going to be on my podcast soon. So like these things I think are where you can get real information versus, that's like trying to figure out a company culture from their mission and values on their website. Like none of it makes any sense. It's all just a bunch of buzzwords and, and I'm someone who's written those things in the past. So there's some truth to everything, but a lot of it is just hyperbole in marketing.
I asked this also because it's funny you say that, but just a couple of days ago, I don't want to take too much time here.
Go for it.
But we were just told kind of the opposite, actually.
Oh, really?
We should look into these things. Yeah, actually the complete opposite. That we should look into the website and see what the values are. What do they stand for? And then look for further evidence elsewhere. Not necessarily into the interview, but as you're doing your research. But these things matter. As a person who's been working for this company, like I think was 13 years in that case, and that was the advice he gave. And I just want to say one last thing.
Yeah,
I will tell you that I had one interview. I don't ask every time because I try to do what you're saying to try to get a feel, for how things are and how people are. But I happened to have an interview some months ago, and I asked directly, "Hey, can you tell me about your culture or something like along those lines?" And they actually said, "Well, we're very old-fashioned. We're very conservative. We're here 9 to 5. We don't deviate from that. You have to be here at that time, and you have to stay here to that time." So she went on and on, which kind of floored me. She was really honest, and said other things I wasn't too happy about. So needless to say, I wasn't too interested in that company. But yeah, just sometimes you get a lot of truth out of it.
Fair enough. Hey, I think that's great when that happens. And I think to your point, you should read their website. You should look at their values. You should infer as much as you can. I always just think it's dangerous when we believe everything. And what I prefer to do is go listen to interviews with the CEO, like if they've been on a podcast or if there's YouTube videos where they talk about the business, right? I go watch all that stuff and just kind of absorb the tone in order to get an idea. But like if you watch a commercial, the commercial is not really telling you the truth. It's telling you what they want you to feel about the company. And so there is value in it, especially if you want to sound like the company when you're there. And so a lot of times on my way to an interview, I'll listen to like in my headphones on the way to the interview, I'll listen to a bunch of their podcasts or a bunch of their videos on YouTube or something. That way all their jargon is in my head when I start talking, and some of it will come out in conversation. Now there might be some like other good stuff that you could do, like look them up in the news. Did they do anything charitable this year? What sort of organizations do they support? There's a lot of good information on their website. I'm not discounting any of that. I just say take it with a grain of salt and realize that there likely is not a perfect company fit. Everything is going to have a trade-off, right? Higher pay, but they don't align with your values as much, or perfect alignment with your values, but they don't pay as much, or the company size is not quite there. I think it's when we start getting too hung up on the different aspects versus what I'm trying to focus on is when you're in the interview, I always want to win the interview. Like that's what I'm trying to help people do is win that interview. Get to the end of that interview and crush it so that they invite you back for the next one, and be the most optimistic, most positive, most wanting to work there person ever until they give you the offer. And then start getting real critical. Wait a second, something was off in this interview. I have more questions to ask. What about this? Why is there no 401k match? Like, and then
vacation.
Exactly. And so it's I look at it more as like, don't put on our critical glasses too early. It's almost like every time you get to a next phase, get a little more critical. In the screening call, this is the best company on the planet. In the third round, all right, I'm talking to the CMO or the CTO or whoever. I got some more questions to ask. And as you go through, you can be more and more critical until you get that offer. But if we're too critical too early, we won't even get to the offer. And that's what I worry about sometimes, is that people kind of shoot themselves in the foot, worrying about the negotiation at the screening. So I'll just put the bow there. And here's absolutely. And here's where we start telling our own stories, right? The company has spent thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on their marketing, their branding. They're convincing you that this company is high status and amazing, right? So Twitter, if you get an interview at Twitter, you're going to be sweating bullets. There's just nothing you can do to avoid it, right? Because everyone knows Google, everyone knows Twitter, everyone knows Facebook, right? That's why FANG is this thing that people use to get you to buy their courses. And this is the kind of stuff that I think we don't invest enough into on our own in order to raise our status a little bit, because brands enjoy talking to brands. But brands talking to people who have no job, that's a power dynamic that we don't want to be in. So if we can tell good stories, if we can communicate our value, if we can really get these points across in a strong way, and if we can even showcase it on a great website or whatever it is that we want to do in YouTube videos or podcasts or whatever, even better. And so we want to tell our stories. So the best thing you can do is dig through your past and find those 3 to 6 things that you did that you really loved to do, those really great experiences, and 3 to 6 things that were a struggle. So when someone says, Martin, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses, I could give them platitudes the same way that we're talking here, right? I could say, well, I sometimes procrastinate, but I'm a really hard worker and I always try and get back on task. It's very general, tells them nothing about me, really doesn't help them make a decision, right? But if I mine my past and I look through my stories, I can actually give them a good answer. I can say, in my previous roles, I've been told by past managers that my strengths are blank. Or here's an example of a strength and how it played out in one of my past roles. Or here's an example of a weakness and here's why it's going to affect my role in the future. I always want to think about this stuff from the perspective of, does it help the person who's hearing it make a decision on how to work with me, right? And this is actually, again, when we think about culture and fit and things like that, sometimes we'll get turned down for jobs and we'll think we screwed something up. But actually, a lot of times we get turned down for jobs because they heard something that showed you weren't going to be good in this role, and they just saved you 3 to 4 years of pain by not giving you that job. I interviewed for a job once, and I went in and I had this amazing presentation. I had to do this whole big take-home assignment, and they wanted it in a PowerPoint. And I put together this Prezi, if anyone knows what that software is, and I had all these zooms and pans, and it was all very cool. And I gave this presentation. It was like an hour long, and I finished. And they're like, "That was incredible. All right, next round interview, you're in." And I was walking through the office. They're giving me a tour. And the creative director comes up to me and he goes, that was a really good presentation. Are you sure you don't want to be on the creative team? And this was for an account manager role in advertising. And I go, is there a job on the creative team? And he goes, no. And I go, then I guess I want the account role. And I get that job. And guess what? I definitely should have been on the creative team. There was I should not have been in that account role. I impressed them, but they saw it. They saw it in the interview that I was actually going to be much better over here than over here. And if I had taken the time, or let's just say if I had the the space at the time. I was a little bit in desperation mode. If I had the space at the time, I would have taken a step back and maybe said no to that role. And so, again, this is why I'm saying tell stories. That story that I just told better illustrates this point than if I just read from this slide. So I'd love for us to stop really quick and see if you can identify one story of a time that you really enjoyed your work and one story of a time that you really did not enjoy your work, and just jot down a little note of what that would be. Maybe it was a project you worked on, a person you worked with, a thing that you accomplished. Feel free to drop it in the chat, just a high level sentence. Ooh, Ida called out the STAR method. Nice. STAR method is great. Oh, Terrell said that too. So one positive, one negative. Thanks for sharing, Ida. Oof, these are rough, bad stories. So one that was shared here is micromanagement. So I actually was chatting with someone, and it's going to be in an upcoming podcast soon. She's been a career counselor for like 40, 50 years. And she talked about how in her interview, I mean, this is at a point in her career where she was really confident, kind of pushing back. She talked about she was in the later stages, about to get the offer, and she talked about how being micromanaged is something that really hurts her ability to perform well. And once she got that job, she started getting micromanaged by the person who she interviewed with. And she said, "Hey, remember in our interview, I said, I don't do well with micromanagement. So if you want me to work on this thing, here's how I'm going to work on it." And, you know, she's in a very confident spot in her career. So she was able to do that. But these are the things where it's like, once we look back, we can start saying, well, what will I put up with? What won't I put up with? And when I know what I will and won't put up with, how do I communicate that to people so that they have a solid expectation of how we're going to work together? And again, a lot of the reason that we tell these stories is to let people know how they should work with us in an effective way. So if you think about strengths and weaknesses, if you were to ask me what my strengths and weaknesses are, Back in the day, I would give you any range of answers from like, I'm creative to a number of different things. And the hard thing for most people is weaknesses, because we don't really want to say something that's a weakness, right? What sort of weaknesses have you all heard or said in the past?
So I was told once that what you should try to do is turn a weakness into a positive. So to say something like, it's hard for me to say no. So because I'm willing to take on challenges, and I'm just want to complete and do a good job or something along those lines. But
Yeah, it's definitely a strategy. Go ahead.
I go for the one where I'm a perfectionist, so I overwork. It's the same as Carlos. It's because I always heard that's, and it's an unfair question. It isn't, nobody's gonna, like, everybody puts their best foot forward. So every time I get asked, I think less of the interviewer. Like, it's like, why would you say
fair.
that? That's a waste of time. But that's just my thought.
Yeah. But here's where there's subconscious questions being asked with every question, right? So when someone says, tell me about yourself, everyone hears, tell me about yourself. What I hear is, I don't know how to start this conversation. Can you kick things off? And really, to me, that's an opportunity to set a tone for this interview that is my tone. I get to set the tone here. So when someone says, tell me your strengths and weaknesses, they might be communicating a few things. One, I'm an unprepared interviewer. Okay, so this person is just reading from a script. I can help them as an interviewee, right? And I lose respect for the interviewer. I don't have any respect for interviewers in the first place, because we're all just winging it. Like most people are not professional interviewers. They're just kind of doing their best, right? I was interviewing people when I was like 21, and I still don't have my life together. So like, all these things are hilarious to me. And so I try to take everything with a bit more humor these days than, disdain, which I think might've been my old way of doing it. And so to your point here, when they ask, tell me what your strengths and weaknesses are, what are they really wanting to know? Well, they might not want to know anything. They might just be reading from a script. But what do I want to communicate in response to that question? I want them to know that when I'm on this team, these are the duties you should assign to me, and these are the duties you shouldn't, right? And if you've had a few jobs and we've just went through all these negative and positive stories, we can identify what things a team should give you and shouldn't give you, right? So if someone were to ask me that question, I would say my strength is that I'm able to sit with people in their emotions. So there was a time that I was coaching someone, and the first thing they said to me within 10 minutes of this conversation, 9 a.m. on a Monday, was, I just found my old suicide note. And I was like, okay, how are you feeling today? And then I broke down for him the 3 different ways that we could do coaching together. And I gave him a choice as to how he would like to approach coaching. And his response to me was, thank you for not trying to fix this. And that has shown me, number one, where my limits are as a coach. And I also communicated with him about mental health and how he should find a therapist and where coaching can and can't help. And it showed me that I can sit with some pretty intense stuff really early on a Monday. And that, for me, is a strength. So if you have students who are struggling, send them to me. We'll be able to work through it. So see how I gave them a strength and a story and what they can do with it, right? You don't want to send that kid to the IT team, right? They're gonna be like, why is this guy talking to us? Or an instructor or something like that, right? Send them to me. Meanwhile, my weaknesses, what shouldn't you give me? You should not give me a spreadsheet and say, try to predict when people are going to get jobs, because I am not good at math. I am not very good at data analysis. And while I'm able to track data and input into HubSpot or different systems, or even create basic spreadsheets, I'm not a data person. So if you bring me on your team, send me the emotional people. Don't give me spreadsheets. Or at least don't give me the complicated spreadsheets. Partner me up with a data person so I can feed them information. So see how I turn this question from a strength and a weakness question into a how can we work together question. And that is what we're trying to do with all of our answers here. And that's why I'm saying focus on stories. It's more about explaining how you work and explaining where they should put you than it is about getting the right answer, if that makes sense. And I have a strong story to go with both of those. I would tell a story about a time where I was working on a team, and my first day I sit down, I'm in LA, and she goes, here's the spreadsheet. Can you start calculating the predictive models? And I go, what? She's like, it's really easy. Just multiply this by that and divide it by this, and you should be good. And I was like, what? Like, I can laugh about it, right? I can actually make a joke of it in the interview. And I can say, like, here's where my expertise ends and where I need a team member to help. And so if you were to stop and look at this, what would be your strength and weakness now? How would you answer that question differently? Feel free to unmute and chime in. I'd love to hear some brainstorms.
I'm sorry, what was the prompt? I was writing some notes.
If you had to restate your strength and weakness with this in mind of trying to explain to them what tasks they should assign you on this team, what would you say? So like, let's say you were in a group project. What part of the group project should they give you and what part of the group project should they not?
I'm really good at bringing the best qualities out of people, like managing them and making sure things are done. But when it comes to math, I missed that episode of Sesame Street. So don't give me problems.
That's solid. So when you're on a team, you should be in a people role, not in a data role.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And then you just need to learn how to relate those stories into your development work. So how can I be the client-focused person or the person who gives the presentation or the person that interfaces with the different teams or is the go-between between different people? And how can I get away from the more data-heavy stuff or the algorithmic stuff or whatever it might be? And we can be specific, right? Like we can say, I'm really good at dealing with clients, not so good at algorithms, but I can do both just at different levels. It's more, and that's why it's strengths and weaknesses. It's not, I never want to touch this thing. It's, I'm just weaker in that area than this area. Terrell, what about you?
Yeah. So Martin, I come from an educational background. I worked in high schools and things, and I guess I'm thinking about one of the things that I hated was conveying value to I guess stakeholders in a sense, just because it was like I was there for the education, right? And so I'd have to make something make sense to an adult versus that the kid will succeed through this. And I used to hate that part, because it was yeah, I mean, that wasn't why I was signed up for it.
And what was your favorite part?
My favorite part, I think a lot about, I used to design designing the pathways, right? So creating a structure for an application process to get students to apply more often to a college or a program or a course.
Nice. So you're really good at structured planning and putting together the system, but you're not so great at dealing with the clients and presenting that work.
Yeah.
So if there was someone on the team that was really good at presenting, then you would be able to collaborate with them in order to put together a structured presentation that they could then deliver.
That's good.
Right?
That's good info. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is how it's more about showcasing our self-awareness than it is telling a good strength or weakness.
I see what you're saying.
And I love these stories that everyone's putting in the chat. So thank you for sharing those. These will play into your strengths and weaknesses. These will play into your, leadership, your successes. Every story that we have will answer dozens of interview questions. So the story of that emotional student that I had can answer a leadership question, can answer a time when you didn't succeed as a coach. It could answer a dozen different questions depending on what they ask me, right? Or a time that you were challenged as a coach, or a time that you found your limits. I was asked that question once and I told that story. And there's all sorts of stuff that comes from each of these questions. Or tell me about your approach to coaching. I won't tell that specific story, but it informs my answer, right? And so all these stories that you're writing down here, these things that you're calling out, these are going to be able to shape your answers in interviews. So let's say they say, tell me a time that you showed leadership. You go, oh, I'm going to tell my leadership story. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. I'm going to tell that same leadership story, but from this perspective with that person. And it's the same story, but focused on this conflict that happened within the story. And now you're answering multiple questions with the same story, right? And you can say, hey, remember that story I told you about the leadership thing, that project I was working on? One of my coworkers, we just kept butting heads in this way. And then you tell that story, right? And it helps them feel like they're getting a well-rounded view of who you are.
And Martin,
Yeah.
to that end, is there I always think about this, is there a quality for a story? Because like you said, we can tell almost one story a million different ways. But
Yeah.
I guess I always wonder if, certain stories are of certain value, right? And this is out of the context entirely because it's not about a job, but well, if you tell a story not about a job, then that's bad. But are there any other contexts within the workplace to probably not tell a story? Or it'd be best not to,
so the stories you don't want to tell are the ones that get you heated. So conflicts with a coworker is usually where this goes wrong. If you tell a conflict that you haven't dealt with and you start to get flustered, it can completely ruin the trajectory of an interview, because suddenly you go from being this happy-go-lucky person in the interview to being someone who's angry. You'll feel your face flush. If you're not, you almost want to tell these stories at home and practice them and record yourself and listen back to it to the point that you're almost telling someone else's story, right? The first time I still told that story about the student who had the emotional issues, I blushed, I fumbled through it. It was very difficult to tell. And I got really worked up because it brought me back to that situation. But I've told it so many times now that I don't get as attached to it. Meanwhile, there's a conflict with a coworker story that I've told before that has completely ruined an interview, because now I'm angry. I'm why am I angry in this interview all of a sudden? Oh, because I keep thinking about this person that I can't stand, and we never really resolved that thing, and blah, 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 blah. So if you're really emotional about a story, or if it's not been resolved or anything like that, don't tell it. And then if it's too personal, sometimes they don't make the connection. So I was asked a question once about I can't remember what exactly the question was, but I gave a really personal answer about family or something like that. And they were like, yeah, but could you tell us another story that's in the context of business? And so if you can talk about real things that are from your career or from volunteer work you've done, or something that's more businessy, those are always better than just personal stories. But sometimes personal stories can be really helpful too, where it's oh, I was always the kid that was drawing on all my notebooks, or some little throwaway things like that. Does that answer your question fully?
Yeah, that's a great answer. I appreciate
it. Excuse me. So how do we talk about our studies? We want to talk about what we did, not what we learned. And this slide is a little bit, the wording of it's not perfect. And I'm trying to find the better way to write this. But so often we talk about, in my course, I learned this, period. In the boot camp, I learned this, period. Have you worked with Python? I've worked with Python for 6 months, period. We care less about what you've learned or how much time you've spent on something than what you can do with that knowledge. So when we tell a story, we want to say, I did this, which achieved this, utilizing what I learned. Does that make sense? We want to talk about the outcomes of our work and how it relates to the business. So I've learned how to coach people. I've learned marketing. But what's more important is how that impacts you. So if you think all the way back to an hour and a half ago at the beginning of this presentation, I said, I started my career in marketing and advertising. That means nothing to you guys until I say, and that I started my career in marketing and advertising, selling products to people. And now I reverse engineer that knowledge to help you get money from companies. Until I put that last piece in there, you're like, I don't care that you've sold stuff to people. Good for you. Bravo. You worked at a credit card company. I have debt. Leave me alone. Right? Like this stuff, like you want to know how it helps you. And the same thing with these companies. I learned this. I accomplished this with that knowledge, and it can help your business in these ways. It's that last piece that they care about the most. Any questions on that? So what makes a good story? Does anyone know this story arc, rising action, problem, climax, resolution?
I teach a lot of literature.
All right,
in English.
I'm going to call on you. Yeah, walk us through it. Can just explain story structure real quick, because I think it's helpful to hear from other folks.
Yeah. So you always have an action, in this case, an incident. This is what starts you reading a story, or where everything starts. Then you have rising action, which is in essence, it's like entropy, where more things happen until you reach a climax, which is like the pivotal moment. Oftentimes it's like that moment in that final episode, or finale. And then TV doesn't give you the falling action because they want you to watch the next series. But then the falling action leads you to a resolution, which completes the story and it makes people feel like they understand what happened there.
That's so on point. I loved it. That was fantastic. And the goal here, what I'm really trying to hit home, is that there's a lot of different ways to tell a story. There's like tons of different story models, but this is a very basic one to say, how do we stop rambling so much? And I'm not a good person to look at about rambling. I am ramble king over here. But when it comes to telling a clear story about something, we want to say why we're telling the story as quickly as possible. So sometimes we'll launch straight into a story. We'll just be like, so I was working with these people and I was doing these things and we were doing Java and we were blah, blah, blah. But you had never established what the problem was you were trying to solve at the beginning. So we need to set the stage. Who was there? What was the problem? What was the project? What was the goal? Give me the context up front, the way you would in a case study or something like that. Then tell me your approach to solving that problem. That's the rising action. Here was my approach. The climax is you actually solving it, and then the resolution were the outcomes of solving that problem. So when I was trying to implement a new web app to help people save their favorite movies or something like that, we came across a problem, and that was that the information wasn't displaying properly with the images. So I had to go into the API and I had to organize. I'm not a technical person. You could probably call me out on my BS here, but you see what I'm saying, right? This happened, which necessitated me to take a course of action, which led to an outcome, which now has given me the skill set to help your business do these things. All right. Does anyone have a story of a project? We earlier I had you put in the chat all the different stories. Does anyone have a story of a project you worked on in the boot camp that you're proud of, that you might want to try and put into this format? I'd love to hear it.
Hey, really quick before somebody does that, that line you just said, which has now given me the skill set to bring change to your business or something along
Yeah,
those
to
lines.
help your business do X, Y, and Z.
To
Right.
help your business do X, Y, and Z. Is that
Mhm.
something? It seems like robotic and not untruthful, but
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I guess because it's not the way we normally speak. But this is something that we should wrap up with, right? When we finish saying these stories, this is like a
In a
key
way,
or
in a way, I'm giving you very templatized sort of
Yeah,
speech
yeah,
here
yeah.
to practice with. And then when you're actually talking to real people, it's going to come out different. It's more so getting your sort of nervous system in the habit of trying to get to that next point, so that when you're there, it comes out colloquially. If you later on, we're going to do our pitches, and if you just read that pitch to someone, it would be okay. It wouldn't be the best though, right? The best is when you can just talk, when you're at the point where you're just comfortable talking about yourself. And to this point, it's like, let's just use the example of the student I coached, right? So I coached someone, they had some real emotional issues. Here's how I coached them through it. That's the rising action. I gave them 3 different options of how we could work together as a coach. I said, you can use this time to vent, you can use this time to strategize, you can use this time to do X, Y, and Z. And then the climax of that story is he said to me at the end of the call, thank you for not trying to fix me and for giving me options that made me feel like I was in control. And if I end there, that's great, but it misses out on the sale, right? It misses out on the connecting piece, which is, so when I'm working with your students, I can really handle those emotional issues that they're dealing with in the job search. And then what I really hit them home with is, so what sort of things are your students struggling with? And now we're having rapport. Now we're in a back and forth, right? So what sort of things are your students struggling with? Is it more emotional, more promotional? Where are they at? And now we're in a back and forth about actual things that the company cares about. Does that help answer the question? Cool. Anyone have an example that they want to try? It's okay if you muddle through it. We're not trying for perfection here.
I could take a shot at it.
All right, Angelica.
So not too sold on my like falling action and resolution, but we'll see. So I was working on my final project for the boot camp, and I was getting everything done. All the code was going well, but then I tried to edit something in the database, and it totally locked me out. And I was researching what I could do, and then finally I found my resolution. I just switched out the databases. I had made a backup, so I was able to go to my backup, and then which then led me to that. I think that would be the climax, and then led me to being able to fully upload my website, or to like host it, to launch it. And yeah.
Cool. No, you did a great job. So bravo, everyone give her a round of applause. The thing that I would say, and I'll just break down what you said here. So I was working on my final project. You might want to give a little context as to what the final project was. So we were launching an XYZ site or whatever. What happened while I was in the process of doing this was I got locked out. That's the issue, right? That's the if you look here, that's the problem, right? So I got locked out, and naturally my emotions shot through the roof, right? Because oh my gosh, how am I going to fix this? This is our final project. So what I had to do was start researching, and I knew I had done a lot of things right up to that point, and I just had to figure out how to sort of backtrack and fix things. So what I ended up finding out is that I could just reboot it from a backup. And that's what I did. I rebooted it from a backup and got things back on track, and we were able to launch the project. Everything was good in the end. Maybe even say what grade you got on it. I don't know. And then you tie it to their business and you say, so whenever I'm working on projects in the future as I would in this role, I'm always going to be saving backups as I go in order to make sure we never lose your data and we never find ourselves in a tough spot if something goes wrong with the implementation. All right. So that was an amazing story, just breaking it down into more detail.
Yeah, really like highlighting that I initially was doing the correct things and that ended up saving me. So yeah, thank you.
Exactly. And that's the takeaway. If you do everything right, when something goes wrong, you can always go to the backup. And that's the takeaway from the story. So bravo. Thanks for sharing that. Now, again, how do we stop rambling? One story per question, one answer per question. A lot of times people will be like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Here's 5 strengths and 5 weaknesses. What's the time you had a conflict with a coworker? Well, this person and that person, and also Janet over there. No, just one answer, one story. It's all you need. And then go on to the next question. What is the right story order? This one is we always want to focus on the things that they care about. So if you can put keywords up front, if you can make sure you get the jargon in there, if you can make sure you hit on certain points that you know they care about, always good to do. So try and order your stories around their questions, and things don't have to be chronological. So a lot of times we can jump around. A way that this sort of shows itself is in our intro. So if someone says, tell me about yourself, we think we have to go in chronological order. We don't have to. We can say, here's what I'm doing now, here's how I got here, and here's how it helps you. That's present, past, future. So you can kind of mix things up. And then we should tell our stories all over the place, in our elevator pitch, LinkedIn summaries, interview answers, and more. Stories are all throughout the job search. So here's just a few things that you can take home if you want to write down these questions. What was your favorite project? What problem did you solve? What skills did you use? And what outcomes did you get? While you write those down, I'm going to turn on a light because I'm like getting absorbed by darkness over here. Did everyone get that? Should I go back? So I did this project, I solved these problems, I used these skills, and I got these outcomes. If you have that for every story, you should be in a really good spot. So for me, it would be, I coached this person, they had this problem, I used these coaching skills, and we had this outcome. All right, looks like everyone is about done writing. Cool. And now we're in the pitch. Okay, so your pitch is just a very simplified version of your stories. And again, we're all about the value. How do you bring value to this company, right? So here's how I like to typically organize a pitch, or here's one way to organize it. I just said it, your present, past, future. So I currently help companies build websites that are modern, engaging, and increase conversions to buy. I got here through my background as a teacher, helping students better understand curriculum and better engage with education materials. And what that has helped me do is really educate the consumer while also building a website, or building a website in a way that educates the consumer. So I'm really excited to work with your company and see how we can redesign your website or build new features that improve understanding of the consumer and increase conversion. What sort of things have you been looking to do with your customers lately? So you can see how that pitch can come together, right? Any questions on that? I know that's kind of like this is sort of a big idea slide.
Say that slower.
Well,
That
Carlos,
was really good.
Carlos, tell me about your background, and I'll do yours on the fly here.
Say that again. I'm sorry to hear.
What's your background? I'll do yours on the fly here.
Okay. My background is in mechanical engineering.
Mm-hmm.
I've project management and project engineering.
And what's your favorite thing about web development that you've been doing lately?
I like all of it actually. It's just the I like front end and back end. I love being able, similar to doing a project, having an idea and being able to execute it from the beginning, see it through from the design and concept, and being able to follow it through from and doing it yourself, to actually even launching it and having see it work.
That's perfect. And this is where there's the personal story and then there's the sales story. I personally like coaching because I think people are fascinating and I love talking about taboo topics and, like money and stuff like that. And I love having coffee and just being on the phone with people. But I wouldn't say that to a company that I'm trying to sell my services to, right? They're not going to hire me to have coffee with their students, right? So I'm going to sell them on what they care about. So what are your favorite business, like what's your favorite part of development that impacts their business? If I was a company, what would be your favorite, what would be the problems that my company has that you love solving?
Oof. Oh, that's tough. I'm not sure.
It could be customer retention, customer acquisition. It could be number of clicks to purchase. It could be general ease of use. It could be any number of things. Like what are some of the things that you've worked on that you've enjoyed most?
I probably enjoyed back end the most.
Okay.
In coming up with solutions to
like, do you prefer complex data or front end design?
Probably complex data.
Okay.
It's kind of a difficult question for me because I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up.
Sure.
But,
we're just taking a shot in the dark here, but
yeah, that. And actually, yeah. So
cool.
But I would say probably more complex data.
So if we did present, past, future, I would say something like this. My name's Carlos. I really love web development for a lot of different reasons, but one of the things that really excites me is helping companies better understand their back-end data. How are they collecting information from people that visit their website and then utilizing it to improve their website? And I got to this place because of my background in engineering and project management. That really gave me the detail-oriented mindset that led me into web development in the first place. And now I'm really excited to learn more about your customers from a data perspective and see how I can better improve your site to serve them.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds really good.
Right? So again, we're not trying to like come up with the one answer to rule them all. What I want you to be able to do is adjust on the fly to whatever the company is looking for, that's the thing that you can serve them, right? So when you go to Nike or when you go to Google, Google serves you what you want to see based on your search history. When you go to Facebook, it serves you what you want to see based on your search history. What I want us to get good at is adapting our messaging within reason, because we don't want to lie, but adapting our messaging to their needs. So this is a front end role. So I'm going to lean more into the front end pitch. This is a back end role. I'm going to lean more into the back end pitch. This is a full stack role. So I'm going to talk about how the two speak to each other. And I'm going to talk about how my background has made me a good candidate for that as well.
Thank you.
You got it. And that's how we connect the dots, right? What I did before has informed what I'm doing now. My marketing work has informed my coaching work, and your teaching work has informed your coding work, and your engineering work has informed your back-end engineering work, right? And so all these things play together. A lot of times we want to run away from our past, but we really have to merge those things together. Otherwise, people are like, who were you before we talked today, right? I had someone who was a poker player, a professional poker player for 4 years. He was a data scientist, and he didn't want to talk about it. He said it's taboo. And I go, what's worse, being a mystery man who had no career for 4 years, or being a poker player who does data analysis? Like, the fact that you've done professional poker legitimately for 4 years, I don't know about legitimately, but you've done it for 4 years, means you're really good at data. So lean into it. And that one day when you sit down with that person who has poker games every other Saturday with their buds, and this interview is now the best interview in the world because you can talk about Texas Hold'em for 10 minutes, like, that is the way to go. So we want to lean into all of it. We want to tell the full story if we can. But then we have to make it short. So here is the thing you're going to want to screenshot or write down. Here is the very simple, if I can get it down to a sentence, here is how you pitch yourself. Merging a background in this role and that role, I help companies solve these problems and get these outcomes. Merging a background in marketing and professional development, I help companies improve their student outcomes through coaching. I know I kind of went a little off script there, but you see what I'm saying. So merging a background in this and this, I help companies solve these problems and get these outcomes. Merging a background in engineering and web development, I help companies build solid backends that understand the customer and improve sales, something like that. Again, it's not a perfect pitch, but it's a way to organize the information so you can then riff on it in a conversation. Here's an example. Merging a background in customer service and web development, I help companies create amazing experiences for their users across the web. So this person hits on the customer service, which means that they understand people, right? I don't say I'm a people person. I say I used to work in customer service and therefore I understand people, right? Merging a background in customer service and web development, I help companies create amazing experiences for their users across the web. And it makes sense because I have a customer experience background, a customer service background, which plays into customer experiences. See? All right, and now it's your turn. Write your pitch. Everyone write it down, and when you have it done, put it in the chat. Feel free to chime in if you have questions.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for this. I did have a question for you.
Yeah.
What if you had a few backgrounds, like more than two?
Of
How
course.
would you simplify that, or would you just talk about all of them?
It's a good question. It depends on how you're feeling about it and how related they are. So sometimes I'll be like marketing and advertising. Sometimes I'll just say marketing. Sometimes I'll talk about, other areas of my career. I've had quite a few career changes. What are yours? What's been your background?
like mine personally have been customer service, social services, film and media, and research.
I would typically draw on the ones that are most related to the job you're applying for. So if it's more of like a media company, maybe pull on some of that film background. If it's more of like a social good company, maybe pull on the social background. If it's more of a just regular tech company, maybe say, customer service because they like that. And you could do a combination. You could say merging a background in social, in customer service, and film and web development. So you could add in a few. I just wouldn't go overboard with it. So I think as long as you're making sense, I think it's okay to talk about multiple things.
Thank you.
You got it. And again, this is also going to be used in like your LinkedIn and your summary on your resume or other places. And if you're typing it out, feel free to put it all, And just to put a little more, like I worked in marketing, advertising. I ran my own business. I've had multiple podcasts. I've done a lot of different things. I wouldn't say it all. Like if I threw in podcaster, it would just be too much. And I think this is to a bigger point. You don't have to say everything right at the beginning. I think a lot of times when someone says, tell me about yourself, we want to say everything. We can kind of hold it and pepper in the fun stuff throughout the interview. So we can be like, oh, yeah, I've also had a podcast, or I've also, worked in film. And they're like, you worked in film? Like letting those things kind of pop up later as fun surprises is also cool. Merging background in product management and technology, I help companies set strategy and feature definition for a product or a product line. And I think I got a little lost in there, but I help companies set a strategy for feature definition.
It's set a strategy and define a features
Perfect.
for particular products within a product.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I love it. Keep adding them into the chat here.
Could I ask a question real quick? So
Of course.
I have a background in information security, but it's specifically in risk and compliance.
Okay.
So I want to say merging a background in customer service and should I just say risk and compliance? But I want to incorporate information security too.
You can say information security. As long as you can back it up with real examples, you're good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions on this as you try to write this down? Fred says, merging a background in engineering and data analysis, I help companies find insights about their customers and help their business grow. That's fantastic. I love that. Bravo.
Thank you.
All right. And I'll let the rest of you filter in your answers as we go. That was our share out. I read a few of them. So the other things that you can do with this is you can put it in your LinkedIn summary. So where it says like, hey, here's my intro, you could say merging a background or with a background in. It's a nice way to sort of set up your experience. So a lot of times people will have like 2 paragraphs about their past before they get to what they do now. That's burying your value. So you want to say, with a background in this and this, I now do this and help companies with these things. And then you can go into more detail. So feel free to put this on your resume, in your summary. Summary should be very short, 1 to 3 sentences. This might be a good opener for that. When you're asked the question, tell me about yourself, you can kind of begin with this. Well, I've had a background in this and this. I now help companies do this, and I'm really excited to chat with you about these things. Remember, when they say, tell me about yourself, they're saying, can you start this conversation? So you can do anything you want. Angelica says, merging a background in customer service and information security, I help companies create web applications that are secure, compliant, and intuitive. Perfect. You're all crushing this. You don't even need me anymore. I love it.
But if we do, we could find you on LinkedIn.
Of course. Yeah. I'm always on LinkedIn. So hit me up there. And I'm on YouTube as well, Career Therapy. I do a live stream every single morning at 8 a.m. on LinkedIn, and it also gets saved on YouTube. And I have a podcast that comes out every Wednesday if you're interested in that kind of stuff too. But please connect with me. Go ahead.
What podcast name? I'm sorry, I was trying to find it.
Oh, it's just called Career Therapy Podcast.
Oh, okay. Duh. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Quick question about cover letters.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Britt.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying to think how I'd apply this to my cover letter because it sounds very good. But in my current cover letter, it's more like that initial, not optimum version.
Yeah.
You are just like telling it's all about me, my story, how I got into software engineering, how I'm doing, all that. So how should I transform that?
Sure.
This is my question.
So for cover letters, I take a much more extreme approach than most of the internet. I think that people won't read cover letters at all. And when they do, they need to be really short. So I try to keep my cover letters to 3 paragraphs or less, and short paragraphs at that. And I take away all the dears and the to whom it may concerns, because it's not the 1980s. So what I try and say is the first paragraph should be all about them. The second, and maybe the second 2 paragraphs, should be all about you. And then the final paragraph should be about you and them together. So I always start the first paragraph by saying company's name, and then I pull something from their mission statement. So this is where, going back to that one slide where we talk about mission statements, I use that as a way to kind of use their language back to kind of relate with them. So I go to their website, I find something in their language that I agree with, and I say, your company's approach to the work that you do in these ways resonates with me because of this. So let's say I'm a web developer. I want to work at Google, right? Google used to say we connect. Our goal is to connect the world, right? So Google's focus on connecting the world resonates with me as a web developer, because I think technology is the best way for people to stay in touch, especially in these changing times. All right. Merging a background in customer service and web development, I have learned how to help people connect and stay, and I've learned how to help people through technology stay in touch and connect, or something like that. Paragraph 2, here's an example of how I've done that. Paragraph 3, maybe a second example if you really want to hit it home. And then the last paragraph, thank you for taking the time to review my application. I look forward to continuing the conversation soon. Something like that, and then wrap it up there. So this is what you do that I care about. This is what I've done that will help me help you do that better. and here's my excitement for us to work together. That's kind of how I'd set it up. So them, me, us.
Thank you.
You got it. Was there another question?
Yeah, it was me. Is this going to be published on YouTube?
Yes. So I'll put this on Career Therapy's
conversation.
YouTube.
Okay. And can I contact you? Because I had a question earlier with
Of
regards
course.
to how do I position Coding Temple. So can I reach out to you?
Yes, absolutely. And sorry we didn't get to that. So definitely shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Probably the best way to get a hold of me. And then we'll chat there.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Martin.
Thank you so much.
This is
Thank you.
this
This
is
is
super
great.
helpful.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
That was great.